Hello, this is Professor Burrows for Criminal Justice 501 Pro Seminar in Professional Writing for Criminology and Criminal Justice. This video we're going to discuss integrating research, and we're going to focus particularly on quotation. What are the differences among quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing? Just to review, these are three ways of incorporating other writers' work into your own writing, and they differ according to closeness of your writing to the source writing. So quotations must be identical to the original using a narrow segment of the source. They must match the source document word for word, and they must be attributed to the original author with both quotation marks and a parenthetical citation. Please note, if you do not include the quotation marks, you are plagiarizing. The parenthetical citation after a sentence tells you that it's a paraphrase or a summary, that you're borrowing someone else's idea, but if you don't have quotation marks, they are your own words. So if it's not your own words, then of course you're plagiarizing. So just be sure, be extra careful, because I see this error a lot. If you are directly quoting, be sure to include quotation marks or you are plagiarizing. Paraphrasing involves putting a passage from source material into your own words. A paraphrase must also be attributed to the original source or you're plagiarizing. So paraphrased material is usually shorter than the original passage, taking a somewhat broader segment of the source and condensing it down. Summarizing involves putting the main ideas into your own words, including only the main points. Once again, it's necessary to attribute summarized ideas to the original source to avoid plagiarism. Summaries are significantly shorter than the original and take a broad overview of the source material. Typically, in writing, we combine all three of these: quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing. We typically intertwine summaries, paraphrases, and quotations. As part of a summary of an article or research, a writer might include paraphrases of various key points blended with quotations of striking or suggestive phrases, as in the following example. In his famous and influential work on the interpretation of dreams, Sigmund Freud, 1899, argues that dreams are the, quote, royal road to the unconscious, page 113, expressing in coded imagery the dreamer's unfulfilled wishes through a process known as the, quote, dream work, end quote, page 42. According to Freud, actual but unacceptable desires are censored internally and subjected to coding through layers of condensation and displacement before emerging in a kind of rebus puzzle in the dream itself. So we see here the bulk of our writing is going to be summary and paraphrase, using just short bursts of direct quotation for a little extra oomph if it's a particularly striking passage. I'd also like to note here, just to remind ourselves from General APA, the year of publication always follows the author's name directly, and the page number always follows the quote directly. So you will not wait until the end of the sentence for your citation. If the name of the author is in text, then the year will follow it directly. Also, the page number will follow the quote directly, even if it's in the middle of the sentence, as in this case. Any punctuation is going to go after that parenthetical expression while we continue our sentence. There are several ways to integrate direct quotations into your text. Often, a short quotation works well when integrated into a sentence. Remember that direct quotes should be used very, very sparingly. Be sure that you have a very good reason to include a direct quotation when you decide to do so. Quotations cannot be freestanding or seemingly randomly placed throughout an essay. A quotation must be smoothly integrated into your own prose. These three basic steps will help you effectively use quotations within your essay. The three I's. The first I, introduce and contextualize. Second, integrate. And third, interpret or analyze the quote. The first step, introducing and contextualizing the quote. You must place the quote in context. You do this by writing a sentence expressing your view or summarizing a point in your own words. This helps provide the context or set up the quote so that it flows naturally from your context. Second, you'll integrate the quote. Integrating the quote creates a smooth transition between your words and the quote. This also ensures that you are not beginning a sentence with a direct quote. You never begin a sentence with a direct quote. It must be integrated into your own sentence. You can do this by using signal phrases and author tags. This consists of the author's name followed by a verb. For example, Doe 2009 illustrates that, or Doe 2009 argues that. We can see here some other common examples of signal phrases and author tags. According to Doe, as Doe explains, in a 2009 study, Doe found that, etc. We always want to remember concision. The signal phrase should contribute meaning to the sentence. We do not want to use a bland placeholder. A primary goal in writing, of course, is to deliberately choose the strong words to emphasize our points. We want to use strong active verbs even when we're introducing quotations and research. Be sure to use different signal phrases to avoid repetition. I have here a list of examples: acknowledges, adds, argues, believes, confirms. Keep in mind these are what are called reporting verbs, so they'll always have the word that after it. We tend to drop the word that in colloquial speech and everyday speech and writing, but again, in formal writing, we have to be sure that we are writing correctly grammatically speaking, so we have to remember to include the word that. Illustrates that, implies that, refutes that, etc. Please note the word mention is not on this list. I see students use mention a lot. Jones mentions that. That's very informal and not technically correct, right? He's not mentioning it over a cup of coffee. He's spending years researching, writing, and revising and publishing. So be sure that you watch out for colloquial or informal words like that. In addition to the author tag signal phrase format, you can also integrate a quotation or research in general by commenting on the nature of the information itself, showing the way it was acquired so that we know it was acquired in a credible manner. For example, in a major national survey, Doe 2006 discovered that. Based on interviews with the study participants, Doe concluded that. In a self-report study, Doe 2006 found that. This is a very, very good format that adds a lot of information and also sophistication to your writing. In a literature review, in order to keep the focus on the content, we want to avoid overusing signal phrases and author tags. We include the author and year in parentheses at the end of the sentence to keep the focus on the content whenever possible. For example, we would write, dogs are superior to cats, and then in a parenthetical citation at the end, Burroughs 2009. Rather than, according to Burroughs, dogs are superior to cats. Again, we want to keep the focus on the content rather than the source when possible. This is especially true in literature reviews because since we are showing the similarities between studies, we're showing where each author agrees, we're typically going to have more than one source in a parenthetical citation anyway. A good rule of thumb for a literature review is to include the signal phrase author tag when introducing the results of an empirical or an experimental study. And our final step, interpret the quote. We want to interpret, expand on, or reflect on, or analyze the quote. Keep in mind we're not restating or repeating the quote in our own words, but instead illustrating why the quote is important. It should be evident why the quote is significant with regard to your own paper. Also, avoid referring to sources as quotes. Rather than in this quote, use this study demonstrates or Jones further explains that. This will ensure that we keep the formal, objective, scientific tone throughout our paper. For example, in his analysis, Doe, 2004, argues that the, quote, bill for subsidizing buggy whip manufacture is ill-advised. It should be voted down, end quote, page 14. Doe realizes that subsidies for unneeded or marginal products represent a poor use of scarce public resources. We can see from this example, we've gone beyond, extended beyond the quote to show why it's relevant, and we're very careful not to repeat any information in the interest of concision. General rules of thumb, as we discussed before, you never begin a sentence with a quotation. It has to be integrated into your own sentence. We do not begin a paragraph with a quote because we have to begin with a nice smooth transition from the previous paragraph. We don't end a paragraph with a quote because that means that we haven't reflected properly or expanded properly on our quote. We always also want to be sure to be succinct in our author tag. English teachers and other professors in the humanities might really like it when you give the author's full name and the full title of the work. However, in the sciences and the social sciences, we do not. We want the author's name, the year, and that's it. So instead of Cleet Snell in Peddling Poison, the Tobacco Industry and Kids argues that, and then a quote, we would just simply say Snell 2005 argues that. Again, we have to have a good reason for including this. If there's no empirical or experimental data, then we would just as easily put it in the parenthetical expression at the end of the sentence to keep the focus on the content rather than an author in a literature review specifically.